Let's take a look at part one of your final project drafts. I will apologize in advance. I'm recording this at home with my dogs in the office and my kids are home for a professional development day. So if there's some noise in the background, I apologize in advance. Anyway, I like what I see so far. I think, again, some tweaks and suggestions, and we could have some strong finals here. All right, let's start with Elizabeth's here. So we have the right. This one I think is an excellent start. We talked about this a bunch in class, but I think just some overall cleanup, I think, for this one would be great. And then also maybe um, play around with the word itself to give it a little bit more like dimension and texture, because you have a little bit of dimension here in the pencil, and then you have a nice shadow going back to our skew. I might, when I talk about cleanup, I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. Like this here, if you go into your direct selection tool, you can kind of get rid of that extra line and some of these extra lines you have in here, or even use since these are all, there's a whole lot of extra points in there if you wanted to get in with your pen tool and then your delete anchor point, and get rid of some of these extra anchor points. And for the purposes of this project, it might seem kind of insignificant, but what I'm trying to do there is get you guys used to producing files for output. So again, we talked about like vinyl and things like that. So if we were to output this in vinyl, I'm going to go back a few steps here. So if we were to produce this in vinyl, there would be a cut here and like cuts here and cuts here, and we wouldn't necessarily want that, right? Kind of the same thing for the pen, the pencil. If you wanted to sort of clean this up a little bit where we have some of these gaps in color here. I know we did how am I blanking on the term? Image trace, right, for this. So getting rid of some of those gaps, maybe filling this in using that shape tool, the unite tool, to sort of create this as a separate rectangle here. And again, kind of like clean this up, maybe widen these a bit, just so we don't have this kind of like, it's not super awkward, but awkward-ish space, right? So get into using those Pathfinder tools that we learned over here. So getting used to some of these Pathfinder tools and cleaning them up, with either your pen tool or making shapes and kind of clean up these edges a little bit. And then as far as the word goes itself, I think it's pretty good. I think you chose a decent font. What you could also do is, if you outline this text, create outlines. So now you actually have shapes to work with, right? You could ungroup. So now you have separate, and kind of tweak a little bit to give it, maybe a little bit more handwritten feel. I might try to sort of end it, again, this kind of seems a little bit nitpicky, but maybe sort of pull this over here and then see if you can have like a line connecting these, or maybe even extend this E, just to give it sort of like, I don't know, personality, for lack of a better word. If you kind of wanted to pull that shape a little bit, you can even exaggerate it a bit. Oops, I wrecked the whole thing there. Kind of exaggerate it a little bit to give it sort of more, more feel, or to match, even I'm just going in with my direct selection tool to sort of match that pen tip, you know what I mean, or the pencil tip. And then I was thinking, if you wanted to either inset your, or even outline your stroke, just to give it, because you have a little bit of dimension here, not to give it that like drop shadow, but if you wanted to give it a little bit of, I don't know, a feel, like texture, you know what I mean? Like you could play around with some vector effects. Might not be the exact thing you want. Yeah, I wouldn't play with vector effects, never mind. But if you wanted to do something like, when we go back to our, Why am I blanking here? Path, your offset. Nope, not outline stroke. I hit the wrong button. Our offset path. You could do like a negative. Let's try 0.0125, and then I'm hitting tab just so we can see here. That might be a little too little, but you can kind of see. Let's do 2.5, and then we'll do like a round join here. And then you can kind of see how we have that like offset, and then you can kind of either play around with, just a lighter color, a slightly lighter color, or a darker color, etc. Just to kind of, you could even swap those, but just to sort of give it a little bit of, personality, I guess, for lack of a better word. Sorry, let's go to here and then select the one in the back, and we'll make it lighter. That might not work too well. I'm selecting the one there. There we go. Not necessarily to give it a stroke, but and then you can kind of, oops, hit the wrong button. Play around with that offset, kind of like the snowball kid. Again, just to give it a little bit of texture, give it a little bit of like, again, personality, for lack of a better word. But I think it's a very good start. I think really concentrating on cleaning up the pencil and the shadow, and then again, kind of like maybe extending that a little bit so it sort of matches the tip of the pencil, and then sort of giving it, again, sort of like that, like personality, I guess, for lack of a better word. All right. We'll go to Jeremy's here. We talked a bunch about this in class, and started a little bit rough and then started working on it a bit more and did a great job doing that. I really like the idea of this butterfly wing as the B. I think it reads really well. The addition of this positive negative space with the butterflies coming out works pretty cool. This is, I think, sort of nitpicky, but I might, I just ungrouped, oh, maybe not. Oh, I don't know if these are oh, there we go. Like I might kind of spread these out a little bit, unless you really want the overlaps, but if you're going to overlap them, then I would kind of force that, really make it more obvious. I might not overlap them though, because you don't have a huge, except for right here, but it's kind of coming out of that shape, have that overlap. Yeah, I might sort of space them out a little bit. Again, it's sort of nitpicky, but just to kind of give them a little bit of, and you might need a little bit of breathing room. I count myself off there. But just kind of tweak where these guys are. But I think the concept works really well. Again, I really like this, positive, negative space shapes you have there. And then again, there's some extra stuff at the top. We're not going to worry about that. And then we did talk about this. This is the font so this is like the original font. That's supposed to be an F. Both of us agreed that that's a terrible F, but that's the font. So sometimes as designers, we have to create our own. I've definitely done it before, our own letters or characters. So it's an F and an L, and that's legit the font. They're pretty bad. But we talked about some tricks with extending this. Obviously we'd have to do a little bit more, but that this is kind of quick and hasty, but we talked about kind of having that descender. You might need to custom create it a little bit, but have that descender even kind of, if there was a way, basically if we kind of just took this sort of belly and stretched it a little bit, you might not be able to do it with the direct selection tool, but you could potentially get away with it. Again, this is sort of hastily done, but you kind of play around with your curves a little bit to sort of refine it and give it more of an F look. And then the same thing with the L here. That L needs to come up. We talked about this in class, that L really needs to come up a bunch there. A lowercase L would definitely be more pronouncing that the height of it's called the ascender. So the height of the ascender would definitely be a lot more pronounced than this. You know, again, all things that we talked about in class. I'm just looking for that anchor. And again, you can refine, but you know, this is sort of quick and dirty, as we like to say as designers. I mean, that's pretty bad, but obviously if you refine it, it'll look a lot better, but that looks a little bit more like an F and an L. Obviously you'd have to do way better than I just did, but you get the sort of idea there. But we've talked about, like I said, we talked about it in the class. I think the rest of it looks great, you know, maybe spacing these out a little bit and then, you know, really refining this F and an L. You might even need to find another font that might work better, even just for those two. Like I've mixed fonts before, and then when they're shapes, it doesn't really matter what font it is, right? But yeah, I think overall, just like, you know, those sort of relatively minor tweaks could really bring this one home. All right, then we have Sanaa, which I think I'm still not getting that right after an entire semester, but again, I think this is a really great idea. I get sort of like a computer vibe from it, just given the font choice. So these are the kind of things where we talk about fonts kind of having personality. You know, the font choices that we use for things will kind of send a different message or give a different kind of vibe, right? So, you know, this reads to me, and it's, you know, not quite arbitrary, but it's, you know, I don't know, it's a little bit personal. But for me, I feel like that this reads very sort of like computer-ish. So I get that vibe. The kerning is done really well. Spacing looks nice. I feel like if anything, that C could come in just a tiny bit, but that's nitpicky. But I like the use of this gradient and the arrow behind it, and then some of the colors here to cover that up. I think for you, again, kind of going back to like Elizabeth's, is a little bit of cleanup and refining. I might actually move this out a bit so that your arrow lines up at least with the T, or even see like just past. What I actually might do is take this as a guide and line that up with your T. Sometimes I like to take, so you're not just like arbitrarily creating a space. That might be a little too much, but just to give it a little bit more motion, separate it a little bit, separate that arrow, and give it a little bit more motion. That might be a little too much, but you can find that sweet spot, you know, as to where you want that, you know, even roughly visually the space, the width of your letter from this corner to this corner, you know, just to sort of give it a little space, you know, separate it from the T a little bit to sort of give it more movement. And then lastly, I would say just kind of cleaning these up. If you wanted to combine, so you don't have the separate spaces, again, if we were to sort of make vinyl, I'm trying to think, let's see. Okay, so you have that. There's a couple different things you could do. You could either play with your, I was going to say orientation, that's not the right word, but your, I'm blanking on orientation, your arrangement. So like if you brought the C to the front, so for like this one, instead of making those squares or rectangles, you could arrange, bring this one to the front, maybe. Are these different layers? Let's see. Oh, they're different layers, that's why. Okay. I think. Oh, they're grouped, that's why. So that's a whole group. That's why. So let me ungroup these, hide our layers. So now we can bring that to the front. I would bring that to the front. If you want that same, you know, essentially it's the same effect instead of creating these boxes, right? So again, if you wanted that one in the front, I would just kind of play around with your arrangement. When you group them, it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard to sort of to do that properly if that's what you want to do. Because again, I just undid, you basically have the same look, right? So I would just kind of play with your arrangement. These are going to be a little bit tricky, and what you can do to clean these up a bit, again, instead of using that, what I might do, So for something like this, to make that E, right? Unless, oh, that is an E. Okay. So what I would do with this E is I would almost make it, not almost, I would make it the same width as your arrow, and it'll snap to that arrow. And then what you can do is use our Pathfinder, which is here somewhere, and then unite that, and then now you have that nice E, and then you don't really need that little square, this square here. I'm going to do a paste in front. And then sort of lastly with these, the N is going to be a little bit tricky, but you can do a similar thing, and the O as well. But what you can do with these, instead of creating these squares, you can sort of use the width of your arrow, right? So kind of like you did with the E, but we're going to use it as a tool to cut. And again, this is going to be using your Pathfinder tool, and then you could do this with the N as well. So what I would do is make a rectangle about, not about, but the width of your arrow, right? And then you can kind of put that over where you want the O, and then this is where we're going to cut minus front using that. So now we have this shape, right? So now again, you don't have to, I'm going to cut that, delete that. And then now we can paste that in front, right? So now we have, basically it's a cleaner illustration. And again, this goes for like output and things like that, but now we have a cleaner illustration, right? So I think for you, it's going to be doing those kind of things and cleaning this up. Same thing with the end, you know, using, you know, you could have this be a solid shape and then basically draw a rectangle about like this, and then use that minus front and then cut this. And then once you have the one end done, you can just copy it and drag it over here. So that way you kind of have, you have shapes like that rather than sort of trying to create this, right? So you have a great concept. I think it's for you, it's going to be cleaning those up and refining and using the Pathfinder tool to just kind of create a more like clean illustration, right? All right. We'll go on to Alexis with our melt, which I think is great. Yeah, I think you have a super awesome concept here. I like your textures with the popsicle sticks. Looks like you might have an extra, this little plus here. I don't know what that is going on there. Looks like you might have, oh, it's just an empty texture in there. We'll get rid of that. So for you, for the popsicle sticks, I would say just kind of clean those up. And this is where like I like to zoom in a ton with my illustrations. Um, you know, so you can kind of get, you know, get these cleaned up a little bit. If you still want that right to the edge there, you know, you can um, select your anchor points. But I think for you on these popsicle sticks, it's going to be cleaning those up. The same thing on this side where there's some overlaps here. You can either move the whole thing in a bit or kind of place and refine. But, you know, I would refine these points again, just kind of cleaning up your illustration a bit, just to make sure that those overlaps aren't there. As far as your actually melting pieces go, I like them. I think they look good. It's kind of hard, or not kind of, it's very hard to make this kind of stuff like look natural and random. I feel like it's impossible to make something look random because in making something, you're already making decisions and it's not random. But I would just kind of vary these a little bit, right? So select your M, and then I'm holding Shift so that now I'm just selecting these. So I might move, you know, move kind of where these things are. Oops, move where these things are just to kind of, as I'm selecting the wrong thing. Oh, are those grouped? Oh, that's why. Okay, I would outline your shapes. So I'm ungrouping those. I would outline your text. So now we can select things easier. But yeah, I would kind of just play with, no, why is that not selecting both of those? Oh, I'm on my direct selection tool, that's why. helps if you're on the correct tool. Okay, so those are, I would ungroup those. You might need to ungroup a bunch, but anyway, you kind of get where I'm going with this. I would play around with like the location of these and just kind of like, you know, set them apart just a little bit. Um, again, it's tricky to make things look like completely random, but you get the general idea. I think as far as those go, I think it's just kind of like moving things around a little bit, especially with the M. Um, and then on your popsicle T there, I had a thought about the popsicle maybe shortening it, so it looks more like a T. It may or may not work. I feel like it reads like a T already, even though this isn't really, the popsicle itself isn't really a T shape specifically. It's a lot taller. Obviously, we have the horizontal works well, but it's way more vertical. Um, but obviously, given the illustration and the objects that you have, it obviously reads as melt. But what I was thinking of having you try is, if we select, I just want to make sure that we have, okay, if we select those, um, I want to lock those. So now we just have, let's see, okay. You can do it a few different ways just so we don't mess up your melting objects. Again, this is going to be not so super awesome. And I'm messing up your bite that you have there, but you get the idea. You can even do it from the bottom up. But I might play around with, obviously that might be a little too short. But yeah, I was thinking of kind of making that a little bit smaller, maybe um, more like, again, more short like a T. If you feel like it doesn't work, I feel like the proportions are getting a little bit off, but I might shorten that a little bit. Um, but yeah, and again, playing with some of these drips that you have, you could even copy and paste some of the ones that you have here. Um, I'm doing my option copy. Don't want all that. So do your option copy, and then just to sort of vary the size of some of these. So like if we got rid of that one, we got rid of that one. Um, so just to kind of vary the sizes of your drips a little bit, um, just to give yourself, a little bit more variety in size and shape. But I think refining, I think again for you, it's going to be more refining and cleaning up the illustration, like cleaning up your texture there in the popsicles. And then, again, you can try shortening that a little bit if it doesn't mess with your illustration too much. And then for, varying the location of your actual drips there. But yeah, other than that, I mean, that's a lot. But other than that, I think it looks great. I think you have a super strong concept. Actually, I didn't say anything about this yet. I like the sprinkles you have in there. It works really well. So moving on to Laura's, I think we have a great illustration here. I have a few things, but I think overall it's going to be sort of like similar to some of the others of just more cleaning it up. So I think we could work on the kerning just a little bit. I know it's kind of like a funky, more fun illustrative shape, but since we have so much space here between the A, V, and O, and then some more space, but there's some sort of crashing. Not that you have to have them all crashing together or all spaced apart, but I think sort of more consciously, um, consciously designing it that way. Um, oops, those are grouped. So let me ungroup those. Um, you could probably get away with a little bit of tighter spacing, right? So if you wanted to have those guys overlap a little bit more, then that's totally cool. And then you could still have some of the space there. Again, you kind of, and then have those crash into each other, and then you could have a little bit of space here if you'd like. Oops, as I just messed up. A. Um, you could either have the space there or have them like very close, because you have the A and the D there touching. So, I would play around with that, like, give it a little bit more kind of like, not that you didn't think about it, but a little bit more thought in where you have them crashing or have them more separated. Again, they're a little bit more illustrative, so you have um, a bit more freedom than like traditional text, right? My other thing would be I would sort of choose one. I'm leaning towards the end to have to actually be the avocado, and I might basically just do, oh, there you go, just leave that as an O, um, and then have the last one be your avocado. And then what you could do is sort of push this sort of three-dimensionality a little bit more. So like if we took this guy and copied it, I'm using that quick copy, and then did like well, you probably had to find a more custom color, but did like a more darker green for the skin, and even adding, okay, good, I want to make sure I had the right thing. It might be a little too dark, but you get the general idea, but try to find that even if you wanted to put some texture in there. Um, but again, sort of go back to like our little snowball guy there that we were playing around with, um, to do that sort of, what do they call it? A pseudo stroke. Um, playing with that anchor point. You might need to refine where, oops, if I hit it just right, it helps if I zoom. Um, if you hit these anchor points and kind of refine a little bit, to get more of like that three-dimensional shape on the last one, right? So it looks more like a three-dimensional avocado. But yeah, I think as far as the design overall, I think it's super strong. I think it works really well. Again, I might play around with your spacing a little bit, and then just do one avocado and really, have that look, much more three-dimensional with the skin on it as well. But yeah, I think this is a really strong concept that works very well. All right, going to May here. So we talked about this a bunch in class. Um, I think so far it's a really good start. I think what we might be able to do is we have um, I think a couple of different things going on and it's somewhat conflicting, and I feel like that might be your issue a little bit. Um, so I think what you might do is if you're going to kind of try to illustrate that like one single drip, to either create or find a shape, um, create or find, like I said, um, that drop effect. Um, Maybe I'll go this way, and then again, this is like super quick, but and then kind of illustrate your word within that, find maybe a different sort of like bubblier font to use to have like the words follow that curve, or sort of like a melting effect if you wanted to find a sort of, like I said, a sort of more bubbly-ish, um, a more bubbly-ish font. And we could certainly work on it. If I need to grab it for you myself, I totally can. Um, I definitely have different fonts, but even like something like that, that's more of like a marker font. Um, Trying to see what other, not to spend all day finding fonts, but um, again, sort of try to find a more kind of bubbly-ish font. Anyway, and you could even do, have either the P be the drop, or, have not quite look like it's melting, but you could have those drips look like they're coming off of one or more of the letter if you wanted to have, um, that sort of raindrop-ish, again, that sort of raindroppy idea. obviously you'd have to refine a little bit. Again, this is sort of quick and not super great. But if you wanted to have it kind of, this is huge too. Um, kind of look like it's coming off of one of the letters. Um, like actually dripping from the letters instead of trying to manipulate that shape. So I think that's kind of one of the issues you might be struggling with is you have like sort of those two different concepts happening here is you have, you know, you're kind of trying to create that sort of melty, dripping look while also maintaining that sort of drop shape, right? You could even change your word to drop and, work on really creating the O into that droplet, right? A couple different ideas, different directions to go for, but I think that the main sort of source of frustration, I guess, that we are talking about in class is that like I think two, you know, not quite conflicting, but they're sort of conflicting conceptually ideas again that like uh trying to do the shape and the sort of dripping effect at the same time. I think if you concentrate on one or the other, I think this piece could work really well. All right. And going to Deric. Again, we talked about this in class a little bit. I think this works really well. I think, and this kind of seems a little nitpicky, but I think as far as a font goes, I might choose a different font. You don't have to go too um, crazy stylistically with this one. Um, again, I have a whole bunch of That's kind of cool. I have a whole bunch of fonts that you guys might not have, but I might try to find something that sort of has a little bit more. You don't want to go with something like that, but something that has a little bit more personality to it, um, and that goes along with the shape. What was the one I did have? This one. I know you might not have this one, but um, something that sort of fits with your theme a little bit more. Oh, does this have? I mean, caps might be a little much. Maybe. But if you wanted to go lowercase, that's totally fine too. But yeah, I think like even, again, even that font choice gives it sort of a very different look. Again, a little bit more personality. I think again, sort of refining your font choice and choosing something a little bit different, and then you can outline your fonts. So I'll do the drop down so we can see where it is, and then under create outlines, and then we're gonna ungroup. And then this way now you can kind of spread these out if you want to, just a little bit to give it a little bit more. And I'm just kind of clicking over 2 times each just to kind of spread it out if you feel like those are a little bit tight or not. So I just clicked 4 times there. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Super technical. You might need to refine it a little bit, but again, I think a different font choice to again just sort of give it a little bit of personality. You could kind of even go probably even a little bit bigger. I'm holding Shift and Option a little bit bigger with the flashlight if you wanted to. If you want to kind of have that sort of bottom of the flashlight here line up with the bottom of your text, or you can push it even more and have it kind of drop down a little bit. Just kind of depends. That's all personal preference. It just kind of depends on what you want it to do. Again, if you want to have that, like I kind of like having personally, you might not, that's fine. I kind of like having this bottom of the main part of the flashlight line up with your letters there, and then have that kind of like a descender sort of. Um, and then lastly, I think we did a really good job with your light. I might play around with your highlight there. We go to our gradient tool. I might even just try 2 gradient stops. So if you pull that one down, and then just really kind of have one on one end and one on the other. Maybe play around with your opacity like you had been, and even kind of changing the color of this one to something a little bit more, you don't want it too dark, but um, like you don't want to go like that dark, obviously. But just kind of play around so it's a little bit more pronounced, right? And you might, again, you might not exactly like that, but like a combo of kind of playing around, that might be too much, but playing around with, yeah, that's a little bit much. But you kind of get the idea, playing around with the opacity and the color a little bit, just to sort of make that highlight, trying to go back, just to make that highlight stand out a little bit more, if that makes sense. Trying to go back to where we were. There we go. Just to make that highlight stand out a little bit more. And it might even be playing with the opacity a little bit, you know, if you wanted to have that opacity be 100%. Add another stop by accident. Oh no, you do have another stop there. So I might play around with your opacities slightly. What does this look like 100%? You know, just to make that sort of like pop out a little bit more. Um, and even if you wanted that to be, let's say, oh, it helps if I actually select it. There we go. Okay. Um, even if you wanted that stop to be a little bit darker, and then you could play around with the opacity of that stop. Um, as I'm kind of beating this to the ground. Um, you know, again, that might be a little bit too much, but just to give it that, you know, that extra little, like it kind of disappears a little bit, especially on my screen. Screen to screen, it might be a little bit different, but I think just to kind of push that a little bit, you know, your 40% and my color and my opacity might be a little much, but just to, I really like that kind of highlight that you have going, just to sort of like have that pop out a little bit more. So really just, I think finding a font that might have a little bit more personality. And again, you can do a font search, like there's, they're not super awesome and reliable often, but DaFont, DAFONT, has some really nice fonts that are generally free to use, and I can make them work for you if you need to. Um, Even if you find one that you like, I can install it on my computer and type and then create outlines for you. So it's just a shape, but you know, you kind of see how just changing the font sort of gives it a little bit more kind of personality. But yeah, I think overall you have a super strong concept. You know, again, some minor tweaks to get this going. All right. I'm going to Nathaniel's. So again, we talked about this a bunch in class. I think for you, for this one, obviously, I think it's sort of refining this bird shape. I think what I might do is kind of select all of these guys, and even, not that you want to be super on the nose with it. Why isn't it letting me? You don't want it to look exactly like a Y, but sort of so it looks a little bit more like a Y, and then even make it bigger, but kind of play around with that. I would definitely make your main bird specifically, maybe make it a little bit bigger, and then even have it kind of like up a bit, like it's actually sort of flying away. And then we talked about these guys, you know, even if you wanted to make those slightly bigger, trying to rotate that as well. Um, oops, I want to do that. I want to get to my rotate, but it's not letting me do it. You know, rotate these guys out a little bit, and potentially make them slightly bigger. Um, but yeah, I think kind of refining the placement and the size and like finding that rotation, I think, um, with the Y there, I think could work really well. I might try a different font choice as well. If you could find something um, not too sort of illustrative, but something that's a little bit less like rigid, if that makes sense. Something maybe a little bit more rounded or um, a little bit more stylized than this sort of like hard edged serif font. But yeah, again, I think overall a really nice concept. Um, you know, I think tweaking the size of this, the location and the rotation of all of your kind of bird-ish objects, I think could really finish this one up nicely. All right, then we'll go to Brandon's. I didn't have the font per se that you used, so mine substituted this Broadway. I'm not sure if it's the same Broadway or not. I do kind of like how this has like this extra sort of space, kind of like the bullet there. So what I might do for yours is I would play with the sort of kerning and the spacing, um, right? So starting with outlining our fonts, and then I'm ungrouping. With if you are going to use this Broadway font, having a little bit of space between your letters or a little bit more than you would normally would help a lot. Um, just because you don't want them super close, because again, if you have these super close, then they're gonna those lines, those extra lines, that are gonna kind of just look like separators. So you want to have a little bit of space, but I don't think like so spaced out. Try not to select everything there. Oops. Select these guys. I might bring these in, or even, generally have it line up at the bottom of your gun there. Um, find a placement that you like. Um, Not that you have to have everything like super rigidly in line, but you kind of want it, you want to place things with an intent, right? Um, if you want them up higher, um, that's also fine, but I would have them kind of maybe sit more, closer up into here, give or take. And what I might do is, you have a good start with the bullet. What I might do is maybe extend this. I don't want to image trace things. Why can't I select that? Is my illustrator freaking out, or no? Okay. Oh, it's an image, that's why. Okay. Yeah, that's why I wanted to image trace. So I would image trace this, or even just recreate it in Illustrator. What we can do is like black and white logo would probably be fine, and then expand it, and we can ungroup and get rid of the white that we don't need. So now we have shapes that we can work with. I might play around with location of your bullet depending on where you want it, and then kind of play around with these lines. Um, your speed lines there, and you can kind of, oops, kind of mess around with them a little bit, have some shorter, some longer, etc. Again, just to sort of give them that little bit of movement. Um, and then you could even have these sometimes with illustrations. You could have, I want to line these up. Again, this is sort of like quick. So you can either kind of line those up so it looks like they're all, so the velocity there is all coming from the same space, or, wow, that's way too much, because that illustration is kind of small. Um, you can go staggered a little bit if you would like to do that. So they're kind of evenly. Yeah, I might have these. Um, oops. I might have, yeah, I might have those stay about the same. And depending if you want to, I feel like, oops, I keep doing that. I feel like if you're going to have your objects mismatched, um, I would either space them evenly. I would either space them evenly, or I would space them evenly, or I would make sure that they're like a little bit more thoughtfully uneven, if that makes sense. Um, Again, sort of going back to the melt piece, it's a little bit hard to sort of purposely randomize something. Um, but I would either space them evenly or have them maybe add an extra one or two and have them like a little bit more loosely spaced. But I think overall, you have a really good illustration, and I think just some sort of clean up a little bit will help this very much. All right, and then lastly, Corbin. Yeah, we talked about this in class a bit. I think it's a really cool concept. The one thing that we talked about was swapping where our rock fingers are for the K rather than the O, because I feel like visually, I mean, we sort of know what it says just based on the hand gesture kind of thing, but I think it sort of reads more as an I than an O. So I was suggesting the idea of having this be more of a K. Um, so replacing, I don't have the I don't have the O, obviously, but I can select these guys, move this guy over. So kind of doing, the sort of opposite of what we had and seeing if we can turn this more into a K shape rather than an O. I feel like it sort of reads more as, sort of visually reads more as an I than an O. So that would really be, I like this illustration. I think it works really well. I like the effects that you have on it. Um, the outlines and the sort of like messy ink sketch of it looks really good. I think it works well with a theme. But yeah, again, I might try to see if I can sort of turn this into the K instead of the O, or see if you can maybe have the hand be a little bit bigger. So your O is basically like this area. This is going to be, and we're obviously not drawing, but like this was kind of just to show you. So basically your O is kind of this area of the hand. So you'd have to make the hand significantly bigger and maybe like you would lose some of the wrist area, but that you may not like how that looks. So I think if you're going to continue to have the hand be the O, then really kind of try to make this area be the O part and much larger. Or I would say turn that into a K. But I think as an overall concept and illustration, I think it works really well thematically and visually. I think in general it looks pretty cool.